All right. Um, we have today a debate about whether dogs are actually related to wolves or indeed even other dogs. And let me just make sure the audio is working. You can hear me, right? Are you there?
Yeah. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah. And stream audio sounds good. All right. And this is known as Bubblegum Gun on YouTube. Hangs out in the chats a lot. And the live streams. We've debated before on the topic of general evolution. And yeah, I want to start off just by, why don't you say a little something about yourself? And then I would like to know more about your little avatar. If there's a story behind that too.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I get the avatar out of the way. The reason I got the avatar from this Russian artist, I thought it was pretty funny. It's from the anime, I think Madoka Magica, but it's a Russian artist rendition of that. So it's fan art.
Okay.
I forgot.
And you just
I
like
forgot the.
the anime?
Yeah, I forgot the name of the Russian artist, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure you just like you can Google it. Somebody.
Yeah. I've got
Uh,
one anime avatar that I sometimes rotate to. Because
which
it's the thing to do, you know.
which anime?
It's just anime style. I drew it, so
Yeah, that's cool.
it's like a snake person. Yeah.
All right. I guess I'll start off by explaining my position. How I did that. Well, for a long time, I think the Christian creationists have pretty much been allowing the atheists to win because without, I'm sure you and I know about the distinction that uh, Christians make between macro and micro evolution,
Hmm.
and I reject it because I don't think even evolution, I don't think nature would have a distinction between macro and micro. So I think it's very dishonest of them
I,
to
I
do
I
that.
agree actually, but we can unpack that if you want, or you can keep going.
No, I think we should unpack that because, like, I
Yeah,
think we should definitely unpack that because that'll get us to where I am.
yeah. So
Well,
from the scientific consensus perspective, there really isn't a difference between macro and micro other than just quantity, and so it's kind of like speciation where there is no hard line between the species and genus and subspecies. It's all just how we categorize it for convenience sake. So it's convenient for us to think of an accumulation of microevolution as macro because we're taking a chunk and categorize a lot of these microevolutionary steps and categorizing it as kind of a discrete unit for understanding's sake, even though it is just an aggregate of these microevolutionary steps.
yeah, I agree there. So, like, no atheist would say it's all macroevolution. They would say it's the accumulation of microevolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so, oh, it'll pop up. And so, it's the I would say because Christian creationism requires microevolution for it to actually be true, and
Mm-hmm.
so they need this little bit of evolution for the worldview to be true. Because if they don't have this little microevolution, they have to say the Bible is false, and they're not ready to do that. They don't want to do that, so they're just starting with their Bible, and they just try to figure out ways to make that true rather than look at the evidence and come into what is true.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, they kind of look at it as macroevolution would be some sort of big change, but it is the accumulation of small changes. So it doesn't ever happen in one large step. And so I think there's kind of at least for like the Kent Hovens, they literally just don't understand it. And one of my problems is asking, okay, so where is the line? How many microevolutionary steps does it take to get to this limit where it can no longer evolve like a different look or a different body type?
Yeah, they never want to answer that.
Yeah. Well, what would you say?
Well, I barely debate them using the evolutionist position, but I always
Mhm.
tell them, okay, if you accept microevolution, does microevolution have a limit? And of course, they don't want to answer that because to them, microevolution doesn't have a limit, and so they can accumulate to macroevolution.
Well, in this, I wouldn't say there's a quantitative limit, but there is a limit to what can happen. Like, um, I wouldn't know what word to use for it, but in the sense of you can't have a mutation to genetic material that isn't there. So that's the limit. Is you're limited by the traits of the parent generation, or in very minor cases, especially for animals and plants and macroorganisms, horizontal gene transfer. Um, so that's not really apparent, but there is a limitation. But I wouldn't say there's like a quantitative limitation necessarily. Obviously, if the sun blows up, that'll limit all life from that point on. But there doesn't seem to be an amount of mutations that's a limiting factor unless it's the quality of the mutation has a deleterious effect, but the discrete amount itself is not a limiting factor.
Yeah, and they speak out of both sides of their hands, out of both sides of their mouth here. They'll in one sentence they'll say, well, all mutations that have been observed are deleterious, but on the other hand they'll say, oh no, sometimes mutations aren't deleterious and they can bring about diversity.
Who's saying that?
The Christians or the monotheists.
Okay, yeah, because there aren't my mic's being testy. Um, yeah, there are beneficial mutations for sure. So where does so kind of break down what your perspective on evolution is? Like how much of it happens, and I guess tie it into the dogs and wolf issue.
Well, actually, I believe in absolutely zero evolution.
Okay.
So when you guys say beneficial mutations do happen, well, if you're going to count, for example, uh, a mutation that gives you a disease, but it also solves another disease, well, in one way, it's beneficial when curing that other disease, but it's still a negative. So just because you're going into debt to pay off another debt, you're still in debt.
So how do you mean? Why is it necessarily a debt?
Okay, for example, I forget which. There was like this mutation, that sickle cell anemia,
Mm-hmm.
and atheists would point that as a beneficial mutation because it helps with not getting this other disease. But that's just like saying, "Oh, I paid off that debt by getting into another debt." So you're not. That's not really
Mm,
beneficial. It's just
well,
it's
not
just
quite, because it's not.
but it's just trick of the words. It's
It's
just word
it's more of
trickery.
a trade off. It's more like, well, I can't pay my rent, but I'll pay my car bill. Um,
Either way,
so,
you're still in the
and
negative.
that is a trade off for the sickle cell trait, but there are mutations like that I went over with SFT with our debate like a couple weeks ago or whatever. That there is no mutational debt. They actually fix. It goes through peaks and valleys. So starts
Well,
mutating, fitness goes down. They get compensatory mutations, fitness goes even higher than it was before.
well, the reason it heals back up is because another person provides a rescue genome, and that's the only reason it gets fixed. But that's not a that's
What do
not
you
a
mean?
benefit. That's not a beneficial mutation. That's just fixing the mutations.
Well, in the experiments I talked about, and I can name them, I'll get them up in a second. It was not, there was no researchers intervening. They were just observing the
No,
natural
no.
evolution.
This is the thing. For example, you can have somebody who's got a disease and a person who doesn't have disease, and these people can have a children. And what the person who's healthy will provide to the person who's not healthy, they will provide a rescue genome to their
Oh,
offspring.
that's recombination. That's completely different.
Yeah, but that's what it does. It provides a rescue genome.
Yeah. So the studies I'm talking about, there is actually a new gene, or a new variant of the gene, um, that wasn't in the population before. So it wasn't a rescue genome that crosses over through breeding. And these are typically unicellular, um, at least in the studies I cited, organisms. So they're not breeding with each other.
Well, I don't want to get too technical because like I don't want to like go into like endless amounts of paperwork.
Well, it is important because you said that there is that a mutation is necessarily like a debt or deleterious.
No, but I'm saying the examples they're giving. So you can have mutations, and they might be beneficial at the time, but in the long run, they're not because they're still a debt.
But where do you get that from? Because the fitness is actually increased.
Well, the way they're just defining fitness is just the ability to reproduce, and
Correct.
you can just have a bunch of people with HIV reproducing like crazy, and a couple
Yeah.
people who are fit who aren't reproducing. Doesn't mean the population that has HIV are just constantly reproducing or somehow the fittest. I mean, if you're going to define it that way, well, you just defined the fitness that way, and
Well,
so
that's
basically,
yeah.
well, that's the thing. You just defined it that way, and so
That's evolutionary fitness, not like Mortal Kombat fitness.
well, that would be misleading in the terms of fitness because when your common person hears fitness, they're thinking about oh healthy, and
Well,
your
yeah, but
definition
that's why it's
doesn't mean
evolutionary
health
fitness.
when it doesn't mean healthy. It just means ability to reproduce.
Well, that's what the word means in the context of evolutionary science.
Well, and the evolutionists, because you guys defined it that way. Sure.
Yeah, so the word is talking about a phenomenon that exists.
But you can't be proven wrong because you defined it that way.
No, but it can be measurable.
Well,
So it
yeah.
can be proven wrong. So
But, well, no,
you
I'm
can
saying,
measure how the reproductive success of a population, and you can compare that to populations with different mutations.
no, I'm saying this argument can't be used against you, this argument of fitness, because you have defined fitness in such a way that it can't be used against you.
No, because that wasn't really, it wasn't an ad hoc term invented to combat creationism. Um, and you could show that all organisms everywhere get lower in fitness. So it could be falsified, the evolutionary
Well,
claims.
the thing, you can have, see, you can have lower populations because of hunting. That doesn't mean for example, deer who get hunted near extinction, just because they have lower reproduction rates doesn't mean they're somehow less healthy.
Well, it's environmentally contextual, right? So a
What it would
shark
be,
is really unfit in the desert. They're really
but it
fit for the deep ocean.
but it would be a misleading statistic.
No, it's just contextual.
Yeah, the context would reveal it's misleading.
But how is it misleading if you include the context?
Again, because you guys are defining fitness instead of which just reproduces. But again, you can have deer who are perfectly healthy, who are just aren't reproducing because maybe hunters are hunting them to extinction.
Yeah.
And
So they're
so,
not so they're not able to combat the environment that they find themselves in. So they're not able to evolve because, I mean,
well,
taken
that's
to the extreme, deer might get hunted to extinction. So it's the same in nature. If you're not fit enough to compete with the other organisms in your environment, then that's you're evolutionarily unfit.
yeah,
And it
because
doesn't matter what we call it. We could call it anything.
yeah, because you guys defined it that way. Yes, it would be unfit because you defined it that way.
No,
Not that
because it's not the word that we want to use, it's the concept that we want to use.
well, it's the this is, the definition, the concept would be the same here.
But what's the problem with the concept? Because that's what's being measured in our study of evolution, is whether or not you can keep making more of yourself.
Again, because you can have scenarios in which like a bunch of deer who have a disease are reproducing like crazy,
Hmm.
but they're not
Well,
healthy.
okay, and as long as they keep reproducing, it's fine evolutionarily because they keep going.
No, eventually this disease is gonna go. It's gonna snowball and wipe them all out.
Okay, then they're unfit.
See, but you're kind of admitting like it's an unfalsifiable. This theory of evolution becomes unfalsifiable. There's no way to falsify it.
Well, of course, you can falsify it. Just because we can describe, again, it doesn't matter what we call it. It's either the population is going to be able to reproduce, or it's not, or it's in decline, going towards not being able to reproduce. That's not like a unfalsifiable statement. It's just it's
Yeah.
measurable.
Well, yeah, you can have reproduction, but just because something reproduces doesn't mean it's healthy. And you can have midgets reproduce like crazy. Doesn't mean all of them are healthy. No,
But
nobody.
it's
So it's a misleading. It's a misleading term when you guys say fit, because no layman, no audience member is going to think fitness means that which reproduces. Because
well, most people seem to know that from school, but scientists don't really care about what the layman thinks. They use terms that work for them. So, I mean, it's kind of like the George Carlin joke where it's like, okay, now we've polluted the earth and it's just earth plus plastic. The earth will go on. It doesn't care. It's just earth plus plastic now. And so if you have this population of whatever that's reproducing, and maybe it's cancer ridden, maybe we produce babies and we all get cancer and die by the age of, I don't know, 20. But as long as we keep making babies, then we're fit enough. And yes, we're less fit than the previous populations if we have lower populations. But if somehow this cancer gives us more, just we start breeding like rabbits and we're on every surface everywhere and we're still able to eat and breed, it doesn't matter um, how miserable our lives are or how sick we get or how fast we die, as long as we keep making more of ourselves in terms of evolution, we're still fit because we
well,
keep evolving.
you guys should be more transparent when you guys say fitness, because you guys don't mean healthy. You just mean the ability to
No.
reproduce. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
that's a
guys don't.
misconception because
Well,
we don't mean healthy.
yeah,
We
and you guys should be transparent.
individual Okay, you could call that individual fitness. Individual fitness does not really matter in evolution because evolution studies population mechanics.
Well, yeah, but populations are made of individuals.
Hmm.
So when you guys just use this definition of fitness without being transparent, it is very deceptive.
I think it's absolutely transparent.
It is not,
Why do you?
because when a person hears the word fitness, they're thinking healthy. and you guys don't mean healthy.
But you can look up the definition of how scientists use the term.
Well, people aren't looking for the definition. They usually have people don't look at the scientific definition. They might look at the generic definition, and by the generic definition, they might come to the conclusion of healthiness, not the ability to reproduce.
But that's not the scientist's problem. So if you Google evolutionary fitness, it says evolutionary biologists use the word fitness to describe how good a particular genotype is at leaving offspring in the next generation relative to other genotypes. So it's pretty easy to find for a layman to find out, but scientists are just going to use the terms that they think are useful for their purposes. They're going to teach it in schools for people who are interested in, but if the layman doesn't get it, it's not really their problem.
Well, they should be transparent. Well, especially you guys here on YouTube, because a lot of you guys aren't transparent on this. Let's be honest.
Well, I see a lot of evolutionary people correcting creationists on their wrong usage of the term fitness. So it seems, and you can Google it within half a second and find it. So it seems pretty transparent to me.
Well, no, it's not transparent to the audience. Sure, I'll agree with you that the creationists have it wrong to call you guys on it. Sure, I'll agree with you that that's the scientific definition of fitness, but it is deceptive to not bring it up.
I mean, if I can't think of anyone who's not bringing it up or correcting creationists on this. So related to this, Ted Gunderson says, I thought it meant longevity and health reproduction being a given if they manage to survive. So that's part of the individual population continuum. So yes, if individuals in general are able to have greater health and longevity, they're going to reproduce better. But the metric is always reproduction. So whatever boosts reproduction is part of fitness. But the thing being measured is the reproduction.
Yeah, that I'll agree with you, but you guys have to be more what's the word I'm looking for? More open about that, because the audience doesn't get this. The layman doesn't get this, and it's very deceptive when they hear this.
All right. Well, I try and be very open about that. I correct a lot of people on that. As for my part, and then I see other people doing similar things. So
yeah, I think we can move on another point. I think I think I want to appeal to this side of you. You have identified as a libertarian, and you don't really align with like the leftist atheists. So you don't buy all the wacky things like the morality particle.
I don't believe in a morality particle.
Yeah. Okay. So, as a libertarian, are you trusting of the government?
Not even a little bit.
So, what do you think they're pushing evolution? Do you think that because they're stupid?
No, because it's because they trust the sciences.
Wait, do you think
there's a consensus in science?
Do you think schools are there to actually get people to go forward in life, or to actually just make worker bees?
Mostly worker bee.
So why do you think? Don't you think? Let's say God is true for a second. Okay, let's just say creation is true for a second. How do you think that would rock the government's political power if that was true?
I don't know. It would probably make them 10 times more powerful because they try and crack down on a theocracy.
So wait, do you okay? If everybody knew God was true and creation was true, do you think the government would have more power?
Yes, because they'd be more fanatically religious. And we've seen in the past where regimes believed in that kind of thing, and they were more.
Wait, you think the government would be more religious?
I think it'd be more theocratic. Yeah.
Do you think monarchies were actually theocratic, or they were just using the Christians to use religion as a to keep to keep the masses docile?
Is probably both.
So by that knowledge, do you think is God a threat to government power or a bonus to government power?
I guess it depends which government you're talking about.
Okay,
Most governments
let's
have used God as a way to shore up their power. But of course,
has okay
cults and different religions have
has
overthrown enemy governments and things like that.
has a communist ever really used religion? Communism?
I think communism is a religion.
No, has communism ever used God as to gain political power? No, right?
Uh,
Nobody would think
Not
that.
historically. It's not.
Okay. Has any democracy ever shown that?
Shown what?
Has any democracy ever shown to use a religion as a government power move?
Has democracy used religion as a way to increase their power?
Yeah, is there any examples of that?
Um, well, the Greeks and Romans were pretty. I mean, I'm not speaking as an expert. I'm just going off of what I know about history. They did have some theocratic laws. Um, I don't think it was that intense, though.
No, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we live in a liberal society. Of course, liberalism and theocracy are incompatible. The rules of the Bible in liberalism, the rules of haram or Islam, they're not compatible with liberal ideals. They're just not compatible. So when you have this new power system that compromises any sort of goal that the or quote unquote democracy has, it has to get rid of it. And what's the quickest way for people to ignore all government power and acknowledge something higher? It would be a god.
Okay.
So does
What?
our government have an incentive to ban or hide any evidence for a god?
No, because most of the government officials are religious. So
Wait,
you're also kind of conflating
do you,
democratic governments with government in general.
well, we do live in a democracy.
Yeah, but many governments do use religion to increase their power or justify their power.
The only ones that
Our
ever really
democracy is secular because we found out that theocracies were persecuting people who had differences of religious opinion.
so you think our government would totally be fine with getting people to acknowledge God is real? That totally wouldn't put a that totally wouldn't lower the amount of power they have.
If God was real,
Yeah, if people acknowledge God was real and we were created, you don't think that would take away from our government's power?
I think that the government would change.
Do you think the government wants to change?
Yeah, they're constantly trying to change and become more tyrannical.
Okay, that's true. But is God? If people believe more in God than they do in their government, is that going to happen? If there is a God,
Well, it depends. Is the government going to claim to be um, informed by that God?
of course, nobody's going to buy that.
Well, lots of people buy that.
A few Karens, a few Christian Karens, and some couple of boomers might.
Well, millions of people in countries that have theocracies,
Well, no, that's just the Islamic
especially
world.
historically.
And the Islamic world is already ruled by Islamic laws, so their government
Yeah,
is
and the
only.
government. So the government is a branch of their religion.
Yeah, the government is there to serve their God, so
Yeah,
all their laws are based around the Quran.
yeah.
In our democracy, laws are not based around the, the Bible or the Quran. They're based around what the government wants.
So do you believe that Western laws and culture is based on Judeo-Christian values?
No, that's cringe.
Okay, I agree. Um, yeah,
Look,
so I think that the government would look different if God was like some scientifically acknowledged concept.
see, Christianity has no bite. It has no rules. What they do is just their whole status quo is let the elite rule over them and tell them what to do, write the laws for them, and the liberals, the democratic government imposes laws over them that goes against their religion. Eventually, they're gonna get pushed out. But if it was acknowledged that God was true, creation was true, now the Christians have a sudden emergence of support that will push it back against the government.
Well, unless the government became a branch of the church and said this is what God wants,
It's not gonna happen.
and if we like the reason we have secularism is so people can debate between each other because there
It's
are there are hundreds of different Christian denominations who all disagree on a lot of things. Some of them fairly important.
nobody would buy it. Nobody would think the government is actually a handler of God. Plus, even if that was true, the government would have to make laws around the Bible, and they don't want to do that. They want to make laws that appeal to them, not to the Bible.
Yeah, and they'll just say, "Well, God said to do this."
Well, they couldn't be able to do that because the Bible would just falsify any claims like that.
Um,
Like,
depending, but
like
there's a lot of stuff you can find pretty much anything in the Bible or twist it
I don't think you could
because
twist
that I
it.
mean,
It would still live. It would still limit the government. Either way, it would still limit the government, and the government doesn't want to be limited.
yeah,
So, so
but God is one of the greatest things to give that kind of power because you can
so
say anything. You can say God demanded this, and people would just fall in line.
well, no, people would look at the Bible and say, "Well, that's not true," and they would just simply replace you, like some sort of Spanish Inquisition.
Well, if they were allowed to debate, they would find things on both sides. So people use the Bible to say slavery was bad, and people use the Bible to say slavery is good. And the government decided on that for them. But if the government was saying, we're speaking for God, I think it would have been probably a different set of dynamics than just the politics between North and South.
But I think the main point I'm trying to make is: do you at least acknowledge this would lower government power?
Um, I don't know. I think that the one
It
thing
would.
I could be sure of is that the government would definitely change. The dynamics would change. There might be some sort of. It just depends on what stance the government takes. Is the government anti-God? Well, then for sure that they would decrease their power. But I mean, I will acknowledge that a lot of the libertarians say um, that they have a higher power than the government, right?
That God has a higher power than the government?
Yeah.
Yeah. So by that knowledge, it is perfectly fine to assume that they have an incentive to push for evolution.
For evolution?
Yeah, they have an incentive to push for evolution in our schools.
Well, it depends because most Christians believe in evolution.
Just because they tricked a couple of Christians doesn't mean they don't have that incentive still.
But it's not the government tricking them because it's the science is doing its own work. The government just teaches whatever the scientific consensus is.
Do you think the government's stupid?
Uh, Mostly incompetent. Yeah.
A few might be incompetent, but you don't get to that level of power by being stupid.
Um, what do you mean, like individuals in the government, or the government as an entity?
Well, let's just say the elites.
Well, this is so. This is why I love evolution so much, because it's applicable to everything. Fitness is about survival. So the government is absolutely unfit to do most of its jobs, which is that it's stating to do, but it's really good at staying around and increasing its power and increasing its numbers.
Yeah, and it will try to vanquish anything that stands or um, is a detriment to that power.
Hmm.
So if God is a detriment to that power, so it has an incentive to shut down creationists.
I don't think it necessarily is or isn't a detriment to the power.
It is. It is for sure a detriment. When our government needs to push for liberal ideals, it needs to shut down the theocratic sects. It needs to shut down Christianity because they will oppose uh, the power gainers in the direction our government's going.
Hmm. But they can just as easily say, just move over to a theocratic model and get people on their side for that. Um, but I don't think everything that the government does is necessarily wrong just because it's the government.
Yeah, but
So,
neither
so
do I. But
they're gonna teach physics, right? Too.
I mean, neither do I. But they certainly do have an incentive to shut this truth down.
I don't know because a lot like I think Machiavelli talks about religion and religion being the opiate of the masses. Like that was a Marxist critique, I think.
Oh, I certainly agree. I mean,
Religion
Christian.
is used to keep people um, either hopeful or compliant. Like if the population believes that there's an afterlife, you can treat them like crap, and they'll take it a lot more than people who think this is all we got.
It's true. Christianity has always set along empires and empire building because it's like a glue that holds like we are one. What a Christian really is saying when say if you don't believe in Jesus you go to hell. What they're really saying is I love you and that's good and all, but what I really want is for you to think like me. And that's what they're really saying because they won't say it out loud. And
Yeah,
that's
well, I agree there.
and that's good for empires if if you want to hold the masses to agree and not have this infighting. But as soon as like if people who are not within this cultish like version of Christianity who acknowledge creationism and the God, well, they'll simply just turn on the empires and start enforcing the rules of God, and not just be bystanders, not to be used like pawns like the Christians are. It'll become a little bit more Islamic, I think.
Okay. So I mean, to tie this back to evolution, so you think the government pushes evolution to push atheism?
No, I'm saying the government pushes evolution because if the masses know that creation and God is real, that will take away from their power, and so they can no longer go with their agendas, and it has to be the Christian agenda or the Islamic agenda, and they don't want that. They have their own agendas.
I don't know because half the government uses religion as their
Yeah, to
browbeating method.
yeah to get votes.
Yeah.
I don't deny that, but like for example, you'll find a bunch of Christians who push for evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are just all politicians are liars. This is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
So them just lying to the masses to get votes and pretending to be on the side of God, it's just a LARP. Sure,
Um. Well, so how does this? So you're saying I should be skeptical of evolution because
No, I'm not saying you to be skeptical. I'm saying the government has an incentive to push for evolution and to lie about this, because if people knew that God and creation was real, that would be a contention to their power, and they don't want that. So they have a very big incentive, because what's bigger than the government? God.
um so do you think a secular or a theocratic government is more powerful?
Neither.
They're both equally
Well,
uh
I'm not saying which one would be better. I'm just saying our government doesn't want a theocracy. The, if people knew the God and creation was real, a theocracy, it's like inevitable.
I think that I look at it from an evolutionary perspective, right? So I don't think that the government wants anything because the government is a population. So there are competing interests in the government. There are a lot of people who want theocracy, who are active in the government or who vote for people in the government. So the kind of the genes here would be the ideas. So the idea of theocracy is out there. It's spreading. It's replicating. But the idea of secularism is also out there, spreading and replicating. And I think the secular idea has more fitness, um, and so it
Well,
it remains the more dominant idea out there.
well, again, this is not about which one is actually better, but that if creationism and God is true, theocracy is the inevitable outcome.
Uh, Not necessarily. You can still have. You don't have to rule with religious laws. You can even teach that there's an entity called God, but you don't. You might still be the government might still be completely secular in terms of saying we don't know which God it is. We're not going to tell you what about this God. They might teach creationism, but you could have a situation where people are still allowed to practice different religions, different interpretations of the same religion, etc.
Yeah, but at that point, if they do admit God, people are just going to pick a religion and obey the laws of that religion. And so
Well,
the government laws are just secondary or even third.
so most of our government officials do acknowledge God, and like they're sworn in on the Bible. People swear in testimony on the Bible. They have prayer every morning in Congress. Our money doesn't our money say "In God We Trust"? Um,
Yeah, but that just feels more like showmanship and tradition rather than any actual admitting that there is a God.
but most people are convinced that there is a God in the United States.
No, most people still believe in evolution, I would say.
Oh, and God.
Well, God, but most people still believe in evolution. So there'll be Christian evolutionists, but
Yeah.
not creationists. And when you have that attachment of creationism, that faith now becomes even more powerful. That means, okay, I am property of a God. So it's no longer I'm just the bypass or the byproduct of a God. No, I am the property of a God. And so I no longer adhere to the government. I now adhere to a higher power. And yes, this can go down the route of religious lunacy, like the extremists,
Well,
but that's comes with the territory.
yeah. So if that were the case, I think the government would just adapt and evolve into something that people accepted as in line with whatever God that they were convinced as.
Well, so then the government would have to come in line with the
Either it would
religious
be,
text.
either it would uh, change or it would be replaced.
What's the thing? Denmark doesn't want to change or be replaced. It wants to keep its power.
Yeah,
So it is incompatible with God.
unless it, well, again, unless it adopts the values of God or is replaced by some kind of theocratic institution.
Which it doesn't want to do. Anyways,
Well, of
let's
course,
take
it doesn't want to be replaced, but
yeah. Okay, we could do
there
it.
are people who would happily construct a government around the idea of a god.
Yeah. Okay. I think we could do another topic. I
Yeah,
think we accept
but
it. But
yeah. So was should we just go into dogs, or did you want to tie this all back into something?
no, we can go into dogs.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, actually, I was going to ask. So you disagree with the creationists, right? Or
The
the
Christian,
typical creationists?
yeah, the Christian or the monotheist creationists.
Okay. So what is
But
your concept of where the species or the kinds or whatever you want to call them come from?
I don't believe in that concept. I think it's nonsense.
Okay. Well, describe what you think the case is then.
Well, I believe like each breed was created individually. So like let's say a Chihuahua was in fact created individually, or
By
I don't know the Aztec god, but there is a creation account for the Chihuahua. I forget which god did it.
okay. So why do you believe that some god created a chihuahua separately?
Because okay, the reason my argument works, I should probably tell the audience the argument. The argument I use is if evolution is true, provide to me one transitional between the gray wolf and the Dalmatia that existed. Now, if we were to break that question down, the reason I use the points, I use point A as the gray wolf and point B as the Dalmatia, and these are both proper nouns. So these are specific names in the proper nouns of things that actually exist, animals that actually exist. And then I finish off the sentence by saying that existed. And this blocks uh, atheists or evolutionists from giving me stupid and crappy responses like Canis or Canis familiaris, because those are not proper nouns and aren't things that exist. That's just saying dog and a domestic dog. And clearly, this is just them being deceptive. And the layman in the audience might not understand that the atheist, the evolutionist, is just saying dog, and it's not really answering my question. And the reason I put it between the gray wolf and the Dalmatia is because we can DNA test this, as opposed to me saying between the Dalmatia and the Tiktaalik. We can't DNA test the uh, couple ancestors after Tiktaalik.
Mm-hmm.
So this brings it down to a circle of DNA testable in which the atheist cannot make a false claim because I can use DNA to falsify.
So evolution is always wanting to know more about what populations came directly from what populations. It's hard to tell, especially without genetics. But that's never really been a problem for evolution. It's been a goal to shrink those gaps in knowledge. But you can't really falsify evolution by saying, well, we don't know the transition between this point and that point.
Well, if the with at that point the evolutionists has to say we're inferring the transitionals, and they don't want to do that because they'll look bad. They'll look real bad, and
They
then
don't want to what with the transitionals?
they don't want to admit they're inferring the transitionals.
Oh, inferring.
Yeah, so because that'll look bad, extremely, because that's them
Well,
giving up a lot of ground, and they don't want to do that.
well, it's inferred by the evidence. I don't think anyone would deny that there
But that's
are
the thing.
inferred
The
relationships.
that's the thing. The evidence is being inferred, and that's the problem.
Well, the evidence isn't being affirmed, the conclusion is.
But the conclusion is evolution. The evidence would be that transitional.
Well, the transitional would be additional evidence, but there is evidence beyond having every transitional form that we can infer evolution from. Because we don't, in that case, then evolution is falsified by virtue of the fact that we don't have every single specimen and every single transition that has ever existed, which is not really possible.
What is the thing? The argument, that's just the beginning of that argument. So if you keep going down this road, I could simply ask you, what are the transitionals between butterflies? And that becomes even harder because there are no transitionals. Have you actually looked at the evolutionary tree for butterflies?
Not butterflies specifically, but
It's the
they,
same
that
thing. The
the
same problem.
case there would be that they all came from a common ancestor of a butterfly or butterfly-like organism. It's not like the monarch butterfly came before. Actually, I don't know any other species of butterflies, but they're not necessarily in a linear line. They could have all come from the same origin, but not be
The
not have
problem
been an ancestor of each other.
the problem is that again and again the evolution is going to have to admit that they're inferring these transitionals. So I could use the same argument for cats, bulls, etc. And again, well, we just don't have these transitionals within the circle of DNA I keep using.
Well, we also inferred that Ted Bundy killed his victims. He wasn't on tape in any of them, and uh, all the evidence is all the conclusions around his killings were inferences based on evidence.
But that's the thing, you guys don't have any evidence. I'm looking for the transitionals or the evidence.
It's good evidence,
But that's
but
you guys are inferring your evidence, and that's the problem. And you guys are presenting like, oh, it's okay to infer evidence.
yeah, it is, because if it's good evidence, then you can infer from that evidence. So I had my dog DNA tested, and you can infer that the fact that she has unique genetic markers from the Chihuahua line, from the Yorkshire Terrier line, and from the Poodle line. We don't know what her parents were because she's a rescue, but we can safely infer that she had those three breeds in her genetic line, and actually we know what mix each parent was,
Yeah,
based
that's
on the fact that we know the genetic mixture of these breeds. So where else are they going to come from than these breeds?
yeah, and that's
But
perfectly.
we don't have a video of her parents making her or giving birth to her. We don't even know where they are.
But no, but that's from an actual logical requirement that she was born.
Yeah, so every animal
And
that exists, it's safe to infer that that was born because we have no evidence that there
yeah,
was any special creation.
yeah, but just because something is born doesn't mean they're a product of evolution.
So
It,
it seems like you're inferring, because there are minor holes in the evolutionary line, that therefore you can infer that they were created.
what I'm saying is that you guys have no evidence for evolution. When we apply it to like
We
the
don't
sort,
have we don't have perfect evidence, but there is evidence. There's genetic evidence, there's fossil evidence,
again, but
morphological evidence. There's just the inference that these animals are so similar and especially for the canids, we have genetic evidence.
Well,
Um,
those are ad hoc arguments. Just because something looks the same, therefore it must be from the same. That's just an ad hoc. If it
it's
was
it's an inference that they're from the same populations.
yes, because you're starting with the precept
So
that
what?
evolution
But
is true, and I'm asking, and what my question does, well, prove evolution is true.
well, we do suppose evolution is true because that has been we've demonstrated and we've already accepted it. So it is an assumption that we're working with most things. That doesn't mean that it's assumed for no reason because it's proven separately. But where is the line? Would you say that that all Dalmatians are related?
To other Dalmatia, yeah,
Well, how do you know that?
because a Dalmatia only gives birth to a Dalmatia.
But how do you know that there weren't separately created Dalmatians?
Well, there were at least two Dalmatia in the beginning, that's for sure, because you need two to tango.
Um, but how do you know that they're all
But I do think there was more
you're
than two by the
inferring
way.
that you're just inferring that they all came from an original population of Dalmatia because they look alike.
No, it's because of their DNA. For example, what defines
Okay.
a woman?
How do you mean?
Not in the
So a
liberal
woman,
way, but
the
like
way that the
in the
way that
scientific way.
we well, there's no real scientific definition. That would be female, right?
Yes, a woman
Uh,
is by definition a female.
I would say no.
Well,
I would
but
say a woman appears female, but
well, like,
you don't identify females by their biological um, by the vagina because you don't go around pulling people's pants down to figure out if they're a woman or not. So that's a separate issue. We can go down that if you'd like, but
let's not go into the liberal politics of it, things. But let's just say, for
mm,
example, what defines water? H2O, right?
yes, that's the scientific definition.
And so we extend that to women. That would be the female. That would be the X chromosome,
I
correct?
think the scientific definition is the one with the large gametes.
Is that XX chromosome?
That well, no, it is in humans, but there are non-XY females. Well, that's male actually. XX is female and human. Um,
Okay, the main point I'm trying to arrive at is it's the DNA. DNA is what makes the Dalmatian, and
okay, but
that's why
so
no.
the god could have separately created two different Dalmatian populations with the same DNA, couldn't it?
Even if he did that, it would still be a Dalmatian.
Okay, but so you yeah, same thing with dogs and wolves though. They're still canids.
No, but the like what specific breed of wolf?
Uh, so I think dogs came from the gray wolf.
Yeah, that is the standard evolutionary theory. And what my question asks is to, well, okay, let's see if that's true. Provide to me a transitional between the gray wolf and the Dalmatian.
But you don't need a transition for every Dalmatian.
No, because they were created that way. But evolution does require transition.
But how do you know that a Dalmatian that lived 30 years ago wasn't just created as a Dalmatian separately from the original Dalmatian creation?
Because even if that was
You don't have a transition every step of the way to make sure that the one that was born in the 1970s is actually born or created in the 1970s was actually born from a lineage that goes back to the original creation.
because even if that was true, it would still be a Dalmatian.
Yeah, but even if evolution was not true, we're still apes.
No,
So the question,
evolution would require to be true for us to be apes.
no, it's just a categorization. We're just a type of ape.
Oh, it's
Um,
just a category.
yeah.
But that category is based on evolutionary theory. So it would still require for evolution to be true for you to make that claim.
Well, it's not because an ape is the definition of an ape includes us, whether evolution is true or not, whether we're related to the other apes or not. Just like we're a mammal, whether evolution is true or not. So whales are mammals, even by the creationist standard. Humans are mammals, dogs are mammals too, even if they're not all related.
Oh, so what? Again, then you're just simply defining it this way, and I can't prove you wrong. Sure, I'll have to agree because you are defining it that way. But
Yeah,
if you're
it is
gonna
defined that way. What's
no,
evolution says is that
you guys are defining it that way, or at least
right.
you, because I have heard other atheists say, other evolutionists say, it is this category is based on evolutionary theory.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the definition of the word.
But
Mammal
no,
does include
but you're saying
whales and humans.
these categories are not based on evolutionary theory, and they're just simply man-made.
Well, the definition does not include that they are related, right?
Well,
That's just evolution.
when people usually use that category, it's based on evolutionary theory. That's why.
Well, yeah, because evolution is like the a cornerstone of biology, but
I mean, if you're gonna use it that way, sure, it's fine. I can't falsify it because you're using it that way.
yeah, I don't think hey Bree, I don't think anyone would not use it that way.
I seen I seen other evolutionists use it as a as as a derivative of evolution.
Um so mammal as a derivative of evolution.
No, the we are apes, and the the kingdom phyla.
Yeah,
What's it called? Of what does the K stand for? Kingdom.
a kingdom. Ape isn't actually one of the it's not a technical term, but I don't think. But it's so it doesn't matter whether we're related or not. We're still considered mammals. We're still considered apes. Just like screwdrivers are all considered screwdrivers, or they're all considered tools. They're not related in a ancestral sense, but you can categorize them that way.
Well, you can categorize tools as tools, but I would never say a flathead is a nut is a square nut.
Right. So I think yes, coyotes can breed with dogs and wolves. What they're trying there are rumors about the dox, which is half dog, half fox. That's never been confirmed, but some people have claimed that it's true. Um, but yeah, so what do you think about the genetic similarities between the canids and the fact that they're able to interbreed? That's just a created feature.
Well, no, it's clearly the DNA is similar enough for them to interbreed. But what people, for example, people like to point at mutts and say they're healthier, but that's
And say
actually
they're what?
people like to point at like some Christians and a lot of evolutionists like to point at mutts and say they're healthier. It's
Mhm.
a claim they often use, but that's extremely misleading because the only reason quote unquote mutts are quote unquote healthier is because puppy mills inbreed a bunch of these dogs,
Mhm.
and so what happens when they mix them, that mixing provides a rescue genome that's no longer an outcome of inbreeding, and so it boosts
Right.
their health, their actual healthiness.
So you think different gods coordinated or the same god to create different species around the world so that with the plan that they would
I mean,
interbreed, save each other?
well, no, I don't think they're actually meant to breed with each other because yeah, if you actually look into the details, mixed breeds are actually worse than pure breeds who don't go through the inbreeding. So what that creates is a racial degradation. So it'll be more extreme in some cases than others. For example, a German Shepherd and a little Chihuahua, that outcome i- isn't as healthy as it would be if it was just a pure Chihuahua or a pure German Shepherd.
Yeah, I mean those are uh, pretty different breeds. That might be a factor. Um, but how do you know that they're created differently? Because what is wouldn't it be more likely that these breeds just differentiate than it is that a god created them
Well, there's no
separately?
there's no proof for that, and that's what my that's what my question reveals.
Well,
Because
there's a lot more proof for that than there is that they were created specially.
well, you guys are inferring the proof.
But the inference is a lot is very well evidenced.
I
And
don't.
there's not perfect evidence. There's holes in the lineage,
There's
but
holes.
but it's
The
a
whole
very
thing.
it's sorry.
Oh, sorry, I had a cough. There's hole through the whole thing. That's why you guys
Yeah.
keep.
And there's holes in murder investigations too, but we can be reasonably sure what happened even if we don't know the method or the motive. If there's a certain amount of evidence, a, uh, a level that's been attained, then we can be sure, even though there's holes in and we don't have all the evidence that we would want.
Well, look, if you guys want to infer the transitionals, that's fine with me. But that's not something that's gonna fly by with me as evidence. But like the reason I use this question is because this appeals to the layman in the audience. It clicks. It's easy to understand, and it clicks with them. For example, I have a challenge for you. I mean, I think you're able to render my question perfectly. So why don't you try my question on a few atheists and watch them? They'll give you this answer of Canis familiaris and Canis lupus. And you know those answers are dishonest. And so why do we keep getting these dishonest answers? Just say we're inferring the transitionals. That's all they have to do. They don't have to go beyond that. But they don't want to admit that.
Well, that's fine because the inference is very well evidenced.
Well, you can say that, but
Because
but at least you're admitting that you're inferring them. Other atheists are not going to admit that, and they're just going to say Canis lupus, Canis familiaris, and that's not what I'm asking for. I'm not asking for a category or a class, and they know that.
well, so the same amount of evidence as you say connects the Dalmatians connects the whole of the Canids. And we have there's also a lot of documented breeding. There were dogs before the Dalmatians.
I don't believe in created kinds.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just answering Chris Evans' question there.
But so do you admit that you're inferring the creation of each breed?
Well, that's the thing. I'm not inferring. I
So
don't
then
need
you
to
must you
because the
must
burden
have
because the burden of proof in this situation is on you because you guys are making the positive claim that it evolved. So
okay.
my evidence is
But
already there. It's already set.
what is the evidence for the created breeds?
Because I'm not making the positive claim that they evolved. So
But you're
them,
making the positive claim that they were created.
yeah. And so my evidence would be the lack of transitionals.
Okay, so that's a fallacy, though.
No, because my position wouldn't have transitionals.
But okay, but this is why it's a fallacy, because if I use the same standard on you, you have a lack of proof for direct creation. Therefore, evolution is true.
Oh, no, for this situation, sure you can say it doesn't get me to God, but I can make more arguments that would like I can add to this, and then it would get me to God.
Yeah, so that's the argument from ignorance is saying that my position is true because your position is false.
No, I'm
Or you
saying
don't have, not even that, but you don't have enough evidence for your position.
no. I'm saying my position isn't making a positive claim that these things evolve. So that burden of proof doesn't follow me.
But the argument of from ignorance isn't about whether something evolved or not. It's because you are making a positive claim that it was created.
Yeah, and so for
So
them
it's
to
it's a positive claim.
yeah, so if there was a transitional, that would falsify my position. So it would be in favor of my position that there weren't no transitionals.
But then you could just say the transitional was created separately.
A tran- so no, that would be me being dishonest.
How?
Okay, if there was a
Why
transition,
why could why wouldn't that be possible for something that's Dalmatian like and wolf like to be just created separately?
because you're let's say let's say God created in between
Hmm.
something in between. Well, that already exists. It's called dingo. But despite them being in between, there's actually no evidence that they're transitional. They're actually their own created uh, their own created breed.
But how do
So
you know?
they did DNA testing, DNA sequencing of the dingo, and so they put it
The
as a
DNA
genetic.
sequencing proves that it's not related to anything else.
No, they put it as a genetic in between, but it is not a transitional.
So yeah, I was gonna ask this question, and Chris is asking the same question. How do you tell the difference between a created, well, he uses the word kind, but a created species or breed, and something that was descended or evolved?
So a graded breed, well, because they have populations of that pure breed, and we can DNA test them if they're mixed or not.
Um, so
Is that standing for true if I saw?
yeah, he says, "What's up?"
Yo,
Um, but so evolved creatures are going to have populations that are distinct and not mixed. So how do you tell the difference between that and something that's created?
I'm trying to figure out because you're saying what if God created like a something that looked like a transitional but wasn't a transitional, correct?
Yeah, well, there are ancient dogs that are basically wolves,
Yeah,
and
but
there are,
but we
and a
DNA
lot of
test.
wolf and a lot of dog breeds today are basically wolves.
Yeah, but we DNA tested them and they're not transitionals
How do you know they're not transitionals?
because they DNA tested them. And in their papers they said these are sisterly lineages, not ancestors or transitionals.
But that wouldn't connect any of the other breeds. And that also wouldn't connect anything else. We would have to infer that the transitional dog wolf is related to the wolf and the dog by the same method. Unless we
No,
had every single member, every single parent, and every single child from the wolf to the dog documented, we would have to infer their relationship.
no. All you have to do to provide evidence for your Your theory is provided one transitional. You don't have to provide the whole entire lineage.
If there are transitionals, we know where breeds come. We know that many breeds that exist today came from different breeds.
Well, that's the thing. You guys can't name a single transitional.
Um,
I mean, don't even bother because I already know every answer.
yeah, but that's not true. I could name a ton of them right now, but the thing is, we'd have to infer that they were related to wolves.
But you're allowed to infer the transitionals. That's fine, but you have to admit that you're inferring them. And atheists don't want to admit that they're inferring the transitionals, and that's the
No,
problem.
because okay, so how big a transition am I allowed to infer?
Well, there's a reason I keep this question within the circle of genetics and DNA testing. There's a reason I don't ask the question between the Dalmatia and Tiktaalik, because you can't DNA test Tiktaalik, but you can DNA test the gray wolf and the Dalmatia. It's, and so any claim in between can be falsified.
So the Afghan hound is genetically classified as a basal breed that um, gave birth to different breeds of dog. Does that count as a transition?
Yeah, the Afghan hound gave birth to the Afghan hound. Doesn't mean it's a transitional.
It's transitional for dogs.
No, that's only based on the evolutionary precept.
So what are we allowed to infer according to you?
You're allowed to infer anything, but if you're gonna use an inference as your evidence, I think that's very weak evidence. None whatsoever, I would say.
Well, that's not true at all because we have DNA evidence and morphological evidence. So that
That's
there's dog fossils that go from wolf to more dog-like, and we can test them genetically. For example, ERVs are similar between wolves and dogs, and that's not possible to get there unless they are related.
no, you're using the ERV. You're presupposing that they are infections, and that's why you think it's evidence for evolution because you're presupposing they are infections.
Right. So we don't have a camera in the cell of every dog that's ever been infected, but we do know what infections look like in the germline. We do know what ERVs look like. Um, and there are uh, genetic elements that look like that. So it's a safe inference.
And no, it's an evolutionary precept inference. I'm not gonna do the ERV debates. I have seen enough with you guys and standing for truth. If you want to do ERVs, you can
But
do it standing for truth.
that's genetic evidence that wolves and dogs are related.
No, that's you're using a precept. Okay,
No,
for example, it's like saying, why do dogs and wolves have their nails in the same place? Is it because they were infected by nails in the same place, or is it because they were created with nails in the same place?
there's the different thing about the things that we use genetic testing for are basically random elements and mutations that can be tracked. And so it's not that we're saying they're just similar.
Well,
It's that there are similarities that are completely unnecessary. So
you can make a tree
there's a
around anything.
there's so wolves would have gene A and gene B, and so if we track down the line, dogs would all have gene B, but then dogs would have gene A has a slight change to it that all dogs have. And it's still the same gene, doesn't really make a difference. There's no creative reason that it would be different, but some dogs have this, meaning that this was a random change that would have been inherited. Because if it wasn't inherited, that means that whatever creator is sitting there having gene A and just deciding, well, I'm going to give some of these dogs gene A tweaked a little bit, and some of them this other version of gene A for no actual reason, because it doesn't actually have a functional difference. It's just, so there are markers. That's what DNA ancestry is about. There are markers that don't actually change the functions of certain genes, or there's a suite of markers that is only present in a certain location.
Yeah,
And especially with ERVs, they're only in that certain location randomly. So there's no reason why a created being would put them there.
there's no
And
reason why he wouldn't not
and
put
if
them there.
if they did put them there wouldn't be differences between them. It would create all dogs with the same gene variant.
No,
So for example,
genetics are analog. They're not digital.
the gene cytochrome C, almost every organism has it, and it's expressed. It's translated exactly the same into protein, but the DNA code for it is different. Like for example, between worms and humans has a different DNA code, makes the same protein. So why wouldn't the creator just give us both the same DNA code for the same gene and the same protein? But it doesn't, because if evolution is true, then there will be minor changes to it over time. Those changes will be inherited, creates the same protein, but we can track based on how different it is what it was inherited from.
What? First of all, you're starting with the presuppose these are infections. Second of all, there's no reason. Like for example, DNA isn't like digital. It's analogs. We're not the same animals. So there might be a need for a different amount of regulation there. And thirdly,
No, because
mutations do
it
happen.
doesn't
So
actually make a difference.
how so?
Because with the cytochrome C, it doesn't. It makes the same protein.
It makes the same protein. So okay,
They're silent mutations.
so it's just a. So you're saying it's is it the same code or is it just different code?
Different code makes the same protein because of the silent mutations.
Wait, by silent
So there's
mutations, do you mean like what do you mean by silent mutations? Is it like they look similar but they have slightly amount of mutations, or is
so
it a
there's
completely different code?
there's codon redundancy where two or more different codons will code for the same amino acid.
Wait, no, I'm trying to figure out. Is this like a completely different code, or is it just like the similar code that has a certain amount of mutations?
It's a similar code, but it's different because it does have mutations. I mean, the mutations are inferred, obviously. Because otherwise, then you have a created being who's saying, I'm going to give worms cytochrome C with this recipe, and I'm going to just, for no reason, change the recipe for humans.
Well, I would say maybe there's something we're not looking at, but also that kind of poses a problem more towards you, because then you have the problem of saying where did this animal get a different ERV?
Well, we know infections happen, and we know what it looks like when they happen.
But
It's like
no,
we know what a
but
stab wound looks like.
yeah, but now you present yourself with a problem because you have to have like a lineage of accounts of tracing back these ERVs, and now you have this ERV that's out of line, and it just popping into existence.
That's how horizontal gene transfer works.
So are you saying other animals out there have the same? The
No, it's that different lineages at the same time are never going to get the same ERV because the likelihood that it's going to insert at the same location is basically zero. So
but yeah,
anything that has the same ERV is descended from that common ancestor that got that infection.
yeah, but yeah, sure. Let's go by this theory. You have to account just why there's this outlier. Where did this one get its ERV from?
An infection.
Yeah, but it has to come down from a lineage. So you now have to present a lineage of where it's pre-evolutionary ancestors got it from, or is it just
So you're
popping
not
into
asking
existence?
where it got the infection originally?
Okay, because according to you, ERVs are passed down from like evolutionary generations, right?
Well, that's it's not according to me. It's they are passed down.
Well, according to the evolutionary theory, the reason we have chimps and humans have the same ERVs is because they pass it down to us, correct?
That a common ancestor passes down to both of us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That. So now we have this outlier that you now have to provide an ancestor that pass it down to them.
Um no, because if we test something else that branched off earlier and it doesn't have it, then we know it came into contact somewhere between this branch and that branch.
Well, that's the thing. You still have to provide it either way.
It's provided by DNA analysis.
Well,
So if
you yeah.
orangutans don't have it, but humans and chimps do, it means the orangutans split off before the infection hit the common ancestor.
Well, that's the thing. You have to provide an ancestor that
No, you
had it.
don't.
Well, if you're gonna infer the ancestor again, sure you can infer it, but again, that's weak evidence. Then.
We don't need to do that for paternal testing and human ancestry. Like we don't need to know your whole we don't need to track your whole lineage back from how you got to America to know, oh, your gene profile is common in this area, therefore you were descended from people from this area.
Um, look, where look, you're starting with the. I don't even know how to tell it, make it more clear. We can move away from ERVs because I'm not the person to discuss ERVs, but I think that poses more a problem to you than it does me, because you do have to provide like these some sort of lineage where they got this ERV from.
Not really.
Well, that's
That's the whole
how.
point of the ERV is
Well, that's how like every other.
that's part of the genetic tracking
But that's
is where they don't have it, it's split off the lineage. That's how they do it.
but that's the thing. You're using ERVs to track the lineage, but you
Right.
also need but you need the lineage to make this claim.
What do you mean you need the lineage?
For example, if you're gonna say, for example, like, if you're gonna say that the ERVs are because our ancestor from our past lineage gave it to us, then you need to provide that past lineage, and you will provide some ape black ancestor, correct?
Yeah, there's different
So,
candidates.
so when you appear to this worm, now that burden of proof falls on you to provide this lineage upon which this ERV can be traced.
No, you just need to know which extant populations have it and which don't. The ones that have it are within the same branch. The ones that don't branched off before. You don't need to know the population that the branching actually occurred in.
You at least need to provide some of the lineage. For
We
example,
we want to know the population it branched in, but it's not necessary.
well, again, then you kind of, I mean, at that point, you kind of admitting you're just inferring, and you're allowed to do that. But I think it's weak
Yeah.
evidence.
It's really strong evidence because we use it to for paternity cases.
Yeah, paternity cases we use DNA, and
Yeah.
it's done and done. We actually have
We're just inferring that this genetic profile came from someone who's related. We don't actually know. We don't have a videotape. We don't have the documentation, but we know that this is what this person's genetic profile looks like, and you have the same genetic profile, and we're inferring that the way that got that the way your genetic profile came from is from inheritance.
well, that's because we actually have
That's
those specimens, and it's necessary for someone to give birth to you.
but that's how
But but it,
every
but
we don't
ever
have an example of
but ever
anything else
but ever
ever getting a genetic profile other than from inheriting it.
yes, but that doesn't follow that evolution must be true.
It's part of the evidence where every genome that exists was inherited from some other creature. So if
Yes,
there are similarities that are so unique that there's no um, that they're essentially random events, then that's a really good inference.
I think inferences are really weak, especially if you're using it as your evidence.
Almost everything is going to be an inference, and just the fact that it's an inference doesn't mean that it's weak. There's a spectrum of how weak or strong the inference is. You can have a weak inference, or you can have a strong inference, but genetic testing is really strong evidence, especially if it's backed up by fossil evidence. And there isn't one sort of genetic testing. There's all of the genetic tests corroborate with each other in the same way. So each one that you use strengthens further the inference.
Well, if your whole theory is based on inferences, I mean, at what point do you think maybe this is not a very good foundation?
Uh, it doesn't matter. It matters how strong the inference is.
Anyways, I think we should wrap it up.
The definition of inference is a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. So it just depends on what the evidence is backing the inference.
Sure. Listen, I think we should wrap it up. It's getting late,
Okay.
but I do want you to like at least take the challenge and like, try to use my argument against other atheists, and try to understand how, from my point of view, it's a little bit dishonest on their side. So go ahead and ask them.
Yeah,
You know,
I don't see how it's dishonest. Your challenge would provide greater inference, but I think that the evidence we have so far is a very strong inference.
I mean, if you're gonna, I'm afraid I'm afraid to ask how you're defining that, but I think if you're gonna define it as the way
Define
you're gonna,
inference?
well, I'm not gonna ask you, but like I'm sure you're gonna
Well,
define it.
I mean, I just read it off of Oxford Dictionary.
No, that's fine. I'm not asking you to define it, but
No,
like,
I'm happy to because I just use the dictionary for
gosh,
everything. I don't have like I always go to the dictionary.
no,
I don't try and play word games. I don't try to have my own definitions or anything.
sure. No, I think like try to do this question and go against the grain, because again,
Mhm.
you define as a
Well,
you define as a
I'm pretty good
libertarian.
at going against the grain.
Yeah, I mean, you want to define it as a libertarian that's going against the grain.
Mhm.
Sure, you left the left, but I don't think the left left you. And so, go ahead and try my argument on a few evolutionists, and try to view it from my perspective.
I think, well, yeah, like I said, it would strengthen the argument, but I don't think that lacking every transitional form is
Not
as
every,
devastating as you think.
not every transitional, just one.
Between all dogs and wolves,
The gray wolf and the Dalmatia. So the
just the
question is,
Dalmatian. What about other dogs?
well, you can use a Chihuahua, but I use the Dalmatia because the Dalmatia is a very unique looking dog, and so
Okay.
people are able to picture a Dalmatia, and it's very unique from other dogs.
Have you ever seen or met a wolf?
No, I haven't been to the zoo or been in the wild.
I highly recommend it. I mean, they're the same animals, man. They're dogs. There's a there's like wolf rescues, and I know
Let
at least in Colorado, I go to this wolf rescue, and you can go up and you can pet a wolf, a full blooded wolf, and they're awesome.
let's just say I want to meet a wolf in the woods.
It's kind of like the spider thing. They're more scared of you than you are of them. But yeah,
I'm still scared of spiders, and I don't
yeah,
touch them. Anyway,
yeah.
yeah. All right. So yeah, it was a good
Well,
chat.
yeah, yeah. We can let's chat some more sometime then.
All right. All right. GG.
So yeah. Well, there you go, folks. Dogs are not related to wolves because we don't have all the transitions. Um, and I thought he didn't really want to accept the inferences that he was making, which I think are much weaker inferences than the evolutionary science. Of course, yeah, I think Bubble is kind of playing with words because he's using the word inference as kind of a weakness, and it's really not, especially if you look at the actual dictionary definition, which again is a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. It doesn't sound so bad if you put it in those terms, does it? So, uh, so there's a ton of evidence, and the way scientific inferences work is based on predictive power. So, if this theory leads to a bunch of predictions, then the inferences based on that theory are very well evidenced. So if I can say, I think there's going to be dog like fossils that are also wolf like, and we go find them. Or, of course, Tiktaalik. We predict based on the evolutionary theory that there's going to be half fish, half, salamander things walking around, which is a novel prediction. There's no other, creationism will not make that prediction. They can account for it, but that's different than predicting it. So, since evolution is so good at predicting things, we can say that the unconfirmed predictions are also very likely to be true. So, we predict dogs are related to wolves. Well, we find fossil evidence, and we find and the genetic evidence, and there's the ERVs that uh, that converge with this prediction. And then there's all the other genetic testing elements that also back up the same exact lineage as each other. They're all cross confirming each other. Um, so the inference there is it's a very safe, it's a very strong inference. And again, it's about predictive power. Inferences are going to be unavoidable and necessary in most cases, especially with science, especially with, what's deemed as historical sciences. We are inferring of things about what happened from the past, but it depends on how much evidence we have for it. We have a lot of evidence for this based on things with predictive power. It's the same with murder cases. We infer most of the time. We don't have videotape of people killing each other. And even that is an inference based on, I know how video cameras work. Therefore, this image that I'm seeing here was created by a video camera. It could be completely fabricated by some unknown technology or power, but we infer that it's the same thing that we bought at Best Buy. So there's a spectrum of how strong the inference is. I think point taken that the evolutionary case will be stronger with each transitional form that we get, and that's why we're interested in it. But the lack of it is not an argument for an alternative. That's a fallacy. And the lack of it, of all of the transitional forms that we want, which is all of them, ideally we would have all of them just for the sake of knowledge. Not only is it expected that there's going to be gaps, but the fact that there's a gap doesn't defeat the position at all, especially because these gaps have been predicted by evolution. The transitional forms have been found because of evolution. So the same method of finding the transitional forms is going to predict wolves and dogs are related. That's a good inference. All right. I feel like I just said the same thing 15 times, 100 different ways. So, yeah. Thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoyed. I guess we're going to do another one. I was going to find this supposed transitional form, but I kind of forgot what his actual challenge was. I didn't go back and look at it, but I think we made I think it was a good conversation for that. I think he's not considering the inferences that he's making and has kind of a double standard there. But I'll let him come back and defend himself on those points. So, goodbye for now. Let's see, do I have a closing? Yes, I do. Dog bless.